Welcome back to Middle Fingers Up. I'm your host, Kieran, and today I'm sitting with someone whose work feels like a mirror for so many South Asians, particularly South Asian women, especially those who grew up learning silence before selfhood, responsibility before rest, and loyalty before boundaries. How many of us are like, yeah, that's my childhood and my adulthood? My guest today is Nisha, and online she's known as Healing Hype Girl. Every time I think of your name, I feel like I have to do a dance with it. She is a relational and trauma-informed coach. She's also a writer whose words cut through conditioning that we've all been brought up with. She also provides a guide for those of us that are overthinkers, people pleasers, and trying to, find our own voices again, trying to hear that voice again. She is right there helping you bring that out. Her story is one of many women I believe will recognize. She was married to an addict for several years. There was a lot of codependency. There was leaving. There was divorcing. There was choosing herself. And there's also choosing to not have children, choosing a life that does not always fit this cultural script that many of us have been brought up with. And so I feel this conversation could not come at a better time because I have been to few events of the late put on by South Asian women for South Asian women, an opportunity to uplift and empower brilliant women coming together to bravely share their stories and strategies in helping make a life full of choices. And I'm excited about this conversation today because I've had several women now come up and start a conversation with me, and it often kind of goes along this underlying theme that many of us South Asian women, doesn't matter what decade you're from, what era you're from, the common thread is that we're living on autopilot. And, we got the departure, we got the landing, but everything in between is just like coasting, and it's just happening. And a lot of the women, much respect, are trying to find a way to get out of that. And I think this conversation with Nisha is all about how do we support each other, support ourselves to start not living on autopilot. How do we exist with choices and meaning? So welcome, Nisha. So glad you're here today. Thank you for being part of our conversation.
Thanks for having me, Kieran. I'm so excited to talk to you about all these juicy topics. I think this is going to be a good one.
Yeah, I agree. I find so many of us women, we've grown up with women that are supposed to be our role models, our moms, our neighbors, our aunts, our grandmas, every other woman that has been around us in between. And their whole life has been a service to others. And we've inherited that. We may not have been directly taught that, but we've definitely indirectly, we've internalized a lot of that growing up. And we've watched these women not really have a moment of joy for themselves, not being allowed to dream in the way that we get to today, no language for what's, desire even. And I think having you here today, pulling a lot of this apart is going to be really meaningful, especially with women that have been coming up lately and talking about their part of the story in that, they're trying to shift in the way that you have. So it's going to be powerful. I can already feel it.
Awesome. Yeah. I think when you mentioned pretty much everything you mentioned just made me reflect about how my word for 2026 is going to be receive, my word for the year. And I think that that's something that most South Asian women probably need to do is receive instead of give, which we've been
Mm.
conditioned to do. That's not to say like don't give or whatever. Like I think reciprocity is a thing, but I think usually it's a very one direction, or there's a lot of guilt for not continuing to give or do things perfectly. So yeah, let's go.
Yeah, let's go. Let's do it. Okay, let's begin. I also like to ask my guests, is there anything in the intro about you that I didn't cover that you want to add, that you're proud of, that you want to share?
Yeah. No, I thought you did a beautiful introduction. As you know, I am a life coach. I am a writer. I'm writing a memoir about my divorce, and I know we'll talk about my divorce stuff at some point. And I think one thing I want to also mention is that how I really like to be a connector. Like I call myself healing hype girl because I want people to feel hyped up about healing and breaking cycles and creating new ones too, not just breaking them, but like creating new norms. But I also
Mm.
just love connecting people with others and bringing us together. And when you mentioned relational, I just kind of want to define that a little bit because I think we're always in relationship. And I think, there's like, in social media wellness land, there's like sometimes that phrase like you don't owe anyone anything, or like you don't owe each other, you don't owe them this or that or whatever, just, if it's specific to some relationship. And I think we owe each other a lot. I think that we are very interdependent, and I'm not just talking about with other people but with the earth too, thinking about the land, thinking about how we're connected to it, thinking about animals, thinking about all that stuff. And I think we're quite disconnected, and when I talk about being relational, that is part of it.
Yeah, that's so well said. I'm so excited to get into it with you. Can we maybe just like back it up a bit and start with little Nisha? So I want to meet the version of you that existed before all this conditioning, before the codependency, before the expectations. So if I were to meet little Nisha, the girl that was at 8 or 9 years old, what would I see? And maybe she was already carrying some of the stuff that we're trying to break, or that maybe she didn't even have the words for yet. I'm not sure. You'll tell us. So tell us what little Nisha at 8 or 9 was all about. What was going on for her?
Yeah, that's actually like such a formative time for me, when I think a lot of
Oh.
my wounds started happening in terms of, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, for anyone. I was born and raised in the suburbs of Chicago. And I have an older brother who's a few years older than me. And then there was myself. And I think 8 or 9-year-old Nisha really wanted to play, but also was starting to feel like she had to be productive. She had to be perfect. She had to do really well in school. And I loved school. I love learning. But I felt like play was very denied to me, especially by my mom, who is very controlling and also a very hard worker. She's a Capricorn eldest daughter. So for anyone who's into astrology, you know what I mean? The eldest daughter of 4 sisters and a
Oh,
Capricorn. So yeah, that was, I mean, if you understand that, like that was who I grew up with. And I love my mom dearly. I've healed quite a lot, and it's still a challenge because I grew up in an environment there was a lot of criticism. So I was starting at that time to like criticize myself. But there was also a part of me that was still fighting to like do the stuff I wanted, to have fun, like to be a child, because I was one. And I really felt like if I wanted to go out and play and stuff like that, like I couldn't do that unless like I proved myself to my mom in a way that was up to her standards, as opposed to I was doing enough. I'm sure a lot of people might resonate with the, narrative that our moms had, where it's like, I was, rolling rotis when I was 4 years old or whatever,
yeah.
and I feel like there was a certain expectation of me to be like what my mom did, to do the same things. And that's just a different time. I grew up in America, not India. There's just like a lot of differences and expectations. And as a child and as a human being, we want to belong, right? So
Yeah.
of course I wanted to belong and be out with kids who were having fun and doing things and watching Saturday morning cartoons. But no, that wasn't me. I was going to grocery stores with my mom to stand in line as an 8-year-old with coupons to get things because there was a limit of one item per person. That's a
Oh, yeah.
lot of what I grew up with. And at the same time, I had a lot of security. I was never worried about like food on the table. I was never worried that my parents didn't love me or care about me. I felt like they were very strict, especially my mom. It was definitely more of a matriarchal family. My dad, he was just very like kind of passive and emotionally repressed. And my mom kind of just, I don't want to say set the rules, but she definitely was more in charge. And my mom recently told me, she goes, yeah, because my dad passed away 13 years ago, but she's like, yeah, I felt like he was like the good, like kind of the good cop, bad cop thing.
Mm.
And I'm like, yeah, I guess he kind of was like that. But I was in my head, I was like, yeah, but you were like extremely controlling and did not need to be. But I still think sometimes she has trouble coming to terms with that, even though she
Mhm.
apologized more as I've been an adult. But I think there's still something she's holding on. So yeah, I just grew up very controlled, but really wanting to express myself and break through, do well in school. I had a lot of friends. I've always had friends, and I'm really grateful for the lifelong friends that I have. I feel like that summarizes it. I think there was always a part of me that felt like I could do more, but I constantly second guess myself. Like if I didn't try something and do it the best way ever the first time, I would quit, because I think school came really easy to me. And then also I had a very critical mother who literally told me multiple occasions when I said, like, especially when I was older, like as a teenager, that you have to make mistakes to learn. And she said, why make mistakes if you don't have to? Like multiple times,
Ugh.
my mama said that to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, that impacts you,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. You definitely are like, oh, I get the message. There's no room for that. I appreciate you sharing that. And your name means night
mhm.
in the Indian origin. And when I think of the way you talk, and yeah, there's a lot of strict parenting and you following the rules. You're also the daughter, so the expectations are even higher. But then I hear you saying you're trying to find your expression, you're trying to find yourself. And sometimes the night dark is a scary time for littles, but it feels for you, even as a child, you were comfortable holding space for like maybe what others feared, because you're still trying to break free of that. You're still trying to find your way to expression. And maybe it wasn't while you were a child, but look at where you are now, where you have found what little you was longing for as a writer, which we're going to talk about. And I just think like as adults, isn't it like so important for us to go there, like go to little us and figure out the things that we didn't get or that we were longing for, hoping for, because it shows up in adulthood in all these interesting ways.
Absolutely. Thank you for connecting that to the night. Because when you mentioned that, I was like, where are you going to go with this? I was like, I
You're
don't know. What
like-
does the night have to do with that? But yeah, it's like kind of being in the dark and realizing like, okay, how am I going to navigate this, to find the light, to find ways to express myself, to birth some creativity. There's this person I follow. His name is David Bedrick. He talks a lot about shame, and he had posted something recently, and I'll probably like, not have this perfectly worded, but talking about like inner child and parenting our inner child. But one kind of flip he made is like how our inner child's also parenting us.
Yes.
And like, like how it's trying to remind us, like you said, of what she needed and how I can meet that need. And it's like a really beautiful guidance. And because I think there's just like I don't want to use the word purity, but like a playfulness that
an innocence.
yeah, exactly. The
Mhm.
innocence that was silenced, through
Mhm.
rules and conditioning and like power dynamics, frankly, in families. And those power dynamics are absolutely impacted also by gender, class, or caste. And, for me growing up, there was a lot of like competition amongst like other South Asian families, like who got this house and who has this car and like that was coming up trying to be like, I made it in the West type of mentality. So yeah.
Yeah, that whole model minority civic sense, like it definitely more than anything created a divide within our own communities instead of coming together as this collective community that we are and can be.
Yeah.
I think it definitely created a divide in a lot of households. There's a lot of surface, hey, hi, and a lot of, oh, I'm coming over for dinner to check out what your space is like and what your work's like. And so people just wanted to do the basic, what do you do for a living and all of that. And I think some of us in our generation kind of carry that along as well. And now we're trying to break that and change that norm as well. When you think of little Nisha, is there something that she was longing for as a kid that you have now recently realized and are fulfilling?
It's so funny how my cat just jumped up when you said that. 'Cause honestly, it was like play and like cuddles and
Oh,
like a gentleness, not feeling like everything had to be work, because that's really like even to this day, I was just with my mom for 4 or 5 days over like the US Thanksgiving holiday. And my mom's definitely chilled out more, but there's always this part of me that's like, I'm supposed to be helping her in some way that I'm not doing, or like she's going to yell at me because I'm not paying attention or whatever. And when I'm holding like my cat here, it's just being able to just receive love unconditionally without feeling like I have to do all this work that isn't necessary. And I'm not like, I mean, I think doing hard work is good. And like, I think effort matters and all that stuff. But equating that work with my worth is something that I've been trying to unlearn. I had a program a couple of years ago called From Work to Worth, actually. I did it once, and it was really beautiful to be along 2 or 3 other people who were really unlearning and deconditioning from that, which comes from, capitalism, it comes from colonialism, patriarchy, like everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I also really saw it in my family, especially as a woman, as you mentioned earlier, when we started to talk, like being conditioned to give and be of service constantly. It's like, no, I'm just going to like cuddle with my cat and be happy and not feel like I cannot relax or rest. There's this Instagram account, I think it's called Women of Leisure or something like that. And it's all these South Asian women, pictures and videos of South Asian women having just joy and resting.
Oh.
And it's like, yeah, I'll try to get the exact name of it, but
Yeah.
it's so beautiful because it's just not something that we celebrate. When I think of growing up, I just think of my mom in the kitchen or telling us what to do. I don't think of her playing, So I want to be someone who has that joy and plays. And I mean, that's also a reason I decided I didn't want kids, because I'm like, I felt like I mothered my mom in a lot of ways too. I was very parentified. And for those who are listening that don't know, just my mom would come to me and confide in me about her feelings and everything. And I felt it was my responsibility to make her feel better. And, as a 12 or 13-year-old who was doing that, I liked it. I was praised for it. She was like depending on me, and I felt like smart and wise that I was like helping my mom, and I mean, God knows what I was saying at that age. I have no idea. It felt important and helpful, but that wasn't my role, but that is what ended up happening. And I've had to pull back and even have conversations with my mom being like, I'm not here to do that anymore. I can't. And thankfully she understood, but there's definitely some things I help with, like, tech things and all that stuff where I'm like, okay, step in here. I think little Nisha just wants to have that play and that joy and that rest.
And she's getting all that?
I think she is. I think there's times where she's really hard on herself. Like this season has been especially like busy for me. And one thing about because I'm going to go to Japan for 6 weeks with my partner of 7+ years. And I'm really excited because I always feel like so joyous with him and that we get to play and explore together. And we always have fun doing that. And so while it has been a very full season, I'm looking forward to having that very soon. Yeah.
Well earned, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think this is a perfect time to go into the conversation of codependency, as you described your childhood as a preteen and early teen, providing this emotional support for your mother, which you're right, wasn't really your job, your role. And we find ourselves in these kinds of roles, whether we're children or even as adults with our partners and our own children. And there's all these jobs, there's all these sorts of parts in our life where we go through not realizing that there is this codependency until maybe it's not there anymore. And when one of the women had come up to me at a recent event, she was sharing that she has a friend who was recently widowed, and this friend that's widowed has 3 kids. And she talked about codependence. She's like, I see my friend who was a server to her partner, also the things that he provided, which in some ways were her independence, driving her, doing these kinds of things, he's no longer here for. And she's feeling very stuck. And so I thought, oh, this is interesting, because that's one version of codependency. And sometimes when it's sort of taken away, or we wake up and we realize, holy crap, I'm going to suffocate. We don't know what to do. And we don't realize that that's what it is. We feel guilty. How dare I feel this way? So maybe you can walk us through a little bit of your experience. You were with your ex-partner for 12 years. You lived through his addiction with him, and you talked even in our consult about some codependency. And so I'd love, for partners today or people listening, maybe even just sharing what that means to you, what that experience was like, and then we can break it down and kind of go through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say codependency for me, and I think a lot of codependency is like this term of enmeshment that we see a lot in brown families. And I think there's a discernment. I think that lots of times in brown families, there's a lot of care and connection and interdependence and the idea of the collectivist cultures. And then lots of times there's expectations and needing to constantly anticipate someone else's needs all the time. I don't think there's anything wrong with like saying like, oh, okay, this person needs this, let me help them. I would say codependency is doing that in a very consistent patterned way where I don't even know what I want anymore. I don't even know what I feel anymore because all I need to do is just pay attention to this person. And I grew up very much walking on eggshells around my mom and being very attuned to like, okay, well, what's she going to say? What's she going to think? Like, if I do this, like, how am I going to have to respond to her? That is absolutely codependence. And because I was so controlled, I knew that the thing that was going to help me exit this family dynamic is finding a man. So, but I was like, I'm going to find a man who's fun, who isn't like rigid, who doesn't make a big deal out of little things and all this stuff. And I did find him, but I fell back into a codependent pattern with him because the fact is that was escape. That was my escape. It wasn't, I hadn't worked on it. I hadn't even really heard the word codependence at that time. And I don't really think it was in the like vocabulary of a lot of us. I think there was like a lot of enablement was kind of the term at that time that's like related to codependency. But yeah, I became so codependent on my partner. I was with him for 8 years. And I was at a time I met him in my mid-20s. So it was a very formative time for me where I finished college, just started my a new job, like first job out of college. And I met him and he had very strong interests. And I was at that time really trying to be like, what is Nisha passionate about? Like, what do I want to do? Because until that time in my life, it's like you were in school, you did this, you had to take these classes, you had to get your degree, you had to do this stuff. And I need a job that like feels legitimate in the eyes of my parents. But like, I also try to and my parents never pressured me too much, thankfully, about career. But I also felt like as a daughter of immigrants, I have to have something to show for all the work they did. Right. So that's kind of the mindset I had. But I was trying to feel like, oh, what am I like passionate about? Is there anything creative? And I wasn't really there yet. And my now ex-husband was basically like, you have no interest, blah, blah, blah. But he had very strong interests around sports, around music. He was a big like jam band Fish person. And he was really into that. So basically what I did is I got obsessed with everything he was obsessed with. I went to all these live music shows. I, managed his fantasy football team. We went to, watch football on Sundays all day at the bar with his friends. It was a bunch of guys and me, like there are all these guys, several of them who were partnered did not bring their girls because they were doing their own thing. Right. But I was like, it's like, I couldn't be without him. I didn't know who I was without him. And I was kind of fine with that because we were very like in love and all this stuff, but there was a lot of abuse and emotional abuse. And, the codependency went both ways. And he had his codependency on substances too, with marijuana and alcohol. And that became an issue. It was like all these different layers of codependency that took over our relationship, but I was just so enmeshed in that relationship now. And so I don't even know if I want to call it in love. Like at that time, it felt like I was in love, but it was very much like growing up in the 90s, like rom-com era. You're kind of in, 90s Bollywood movies too. It's like
I was going to throw the Bollywood. Yeah. I know where you're going with this. Yeah.
Yeah. You're like convinced like, oh, there's this dream and this romance, blah, blah, blah. And there's nothing wrong with romance or anything. Please have that. But there's also just
we needed grand gestures. Like it just felt like it wasn't genuine if there weren't grand gestures occurring.
Absolutely. And he was very romantic and very sweet and very loving. We were very affectionate with each other, but that also came with a lot of emotional abuse and verbal abuse that I experienced. But he always apologized. So that's what kept us together. He would always apologize. So it just kept me going. I'm like hoping he would change. And the funny thing is, despite the substance abuse and everything, I tell people that the biggest reason I left him was because, so when he had gotten sober and I started going to Al-Anon, and for those who aren't familiar, Al-Anon is basically another 12-step program like Alcoholics Anonymous, but for people who have loved ones who have alcohol or addiction issues. And I started learning this idea of detaching with love. Like I don't have to be codependent and attached to him. I can, if he wants to go to something, I don't have to go. I can say, I love you, and I'm not going to go to that. And he was sober for about a year and a half, and then he relapsed. And I was like, okay, I'm really going to put this into practice. And I started just doing all this stuff that if he wanted to go to his nephew's baseball games, like I'd be like, okay, I don't want to go. Like I would always go to those. And then my whole Sunday and weekends were taken up. I'm like, I want to read. I want to read this really cool book. I had a blog at the time. I want to write on my blog. I want to do these things. And I started doing that. And I started realizing, wow, when I do my own thing, it's not just that I do my own thing. It's that I don't really want to share any of it with him. Not that we have to do it together, but like, I don't even want to talk to him about it. And when I do talk to him, he just doesn't get it. He's not willing to receive it. And I'm like, we're just like not compatible, and we never were. And I just forced my compatibility, with everything he loved. And he had such this dominant personality, a lot of narcissistic personality traits as well. I don't really like to label narcissism. I'm not a psychiatrist or anything. And I think sometimes it gets overused, but definitely those traits were absolutely there. His needs were priority centered all the time. And it got better when he was sober and he was in AA and really working his program. But the fact is he relapsed because his needs weren't being met. My father had passed away unexpectedly, and I had to, help my mom out and send her needs. Absolutely. Because she did need me at the time. And that didn't feel like codependency. That felt like me, like, no, my dad died, That's a time where you need your partner to show up, and sometimes they have to show up more for you. That's just what a relationship is. And he wasn't able to, and then he relapsed. So it was probably the best thing that could have happened in a way, because it made me realize like how much. I always say it's like I had one eye open and then the other one opened, and I was like, whoa, wait, like I can't go back. I can't unsee what I'm seeing now. And when I was in my truth and did what I want, I felt like I had nothing to talk to him about. And that's when I realized one of the most formative books for me after my divorce was All About Love by Bell Hooks, because she talks about interdependence. And it just blew my mind, because it's like, oh, I can be in love with someone. And I do have a partner right now of over 7 years, and he has very strong interests that I support him for, but they're not my interests, and that's fine. And there's things I love that it's not his interest, but he supports me, and it's fine, and we could talk about it and share that with each other without having to always. He loves volleyball and goes to take pictures of volleyball tournaments. Like I don't go to that. My ex-husband, I would have like gone to all of that and just sat there. But no, now I'm like writing my memoir and have my business. Like I was thinking actually in July, I had gone on a trip with my partner for like 3.5 weeks, a road trip. And I had to do some things for work because I have my own business, right? And I was thinking, I'm like, wow, if I was in a relationship with my ex-husband, there's no way any of those things could have happened. Like my boyfriend and I, we talked about this trip and like, okay, this is when I'm going to need to do this. And I remember I was going to Toronto actually to see a client and have like a VIP day with her. And we were figuring out like, okay, I'm going to have to be in like the Airbnb, like while she comes. And he was like, okay, I'll like go here and like do this. And there was one night I was going to have to facilitate something and we needed to get somewhere at a certain time. He's like, okay, that's fine. He's like, I'll go see a movie. Like he was so working with me on this, where my ex-husband would have just centered everything he needed. Like I could not even imagine having my own business while being married to him, because I just wouldn't have a partner. I didn't have a partner. Yeah.
Yeah. You do such a wonderful job being vulnerable and sharing parts of your past and helping us understand a day in the life of what codependency can look like. I think some of us are in these kinds of situations and don't recognize it because it's also fulfilling a need for both parties. Like you were saying, you were getting something out of it and he was getting something out of it, but it was unhealthy. Yeah. And you mentioned in this part of your story that you didn't know what Nisha wanted and who she was. And so I'm curious, did you find her, like who she is and what she loves? Like, how would you answer that now?
Yeah, absolutely. I did. I mean, it's always a process too. I think we're always becoming and returning to ourselves in different ways.
Yes.
Right. Like now I'm going through perimenopause. So that's
yay, like yes, high five, buddy.
Which, by the way, someone sent me this TikTok where they called it cougar puberty.
Yeah. Oh, I called it the second puberty. That's so funny. 100% cougar puberty.
Yeah, I love it. I was like, okay, I'm down with this. Yeah, I think actually one of the biggest returns to myself was like, before I met my ex-husband, I was starting to actually really get more into like social justice and thinking about equity in the world and the way systems impact us. And when I got with my husband, he definitely like understood, like, okay, yes, there's racism and all these things. And we would joke about that stuff. It's not that he was unaware, but I really started getting more into it after I started detaching with love. And I would try to talk to him about it. And he just was like not into it. And I will say that I was definitely like more demanding about it. I'm like, well, and I even like criticized his job. He worked in like advertising and I was criticizing it. And I was just like in that mode. You just get in that mode when you realize like, something's all wrong. And he just wasn't there. He wasn't able to meet me there. And I just started seeing like, this is important to me. We don't have to agree on everything. Like, yeah, I don't even know my partner and I, we very much consider marginalizations and systems and how systems impact people and how they harm people and what privilege is. Like we both have a common understanding of that. We don't always agree on every single thing, but we can have good conversations about it. We can exchange different ideas about it. We listen to each other. Where with my ex-husband, he was just kind of shutting it down. And yeah, that was like another thing that made me be like, this is what matters to me. And this is what's important to me. And I want to have a partner who cares about this stuff at minimum. So that was the first like inkling of returning back to myself that I realized was a necessity for me and any partner I chose in the future, that I needed to have someone who cared about the world and cared about other people and how it worked. And if you don't, that's fine, but that's not going to work for me.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. What part of you do you feel, if there was one part and only one part, I'm sure there was many, but if you could pick the most important part of you that you had to unlearn in order to make the move to leave and do your own thing there?
Yeah. So, I think it's really important for me to say that, yes, it was an abusive relationship. Yes, he was very controlling. And now I'm an adult. Like I realize like the ways I was wounded and how that put me in a controlling situation too. I was also controlling over him, trying to change him, trying to make him better, trying to see his potential. Like please don't, ladies out there, do not marry someone for their potential. They are who they are. You have to accept them for where they're at. And that's who you're with. That's who you're growing with. But I definitely.
It's a great PSA.
Yes. PSA. Just, yeah. No one's perfect. We're always growing and learning and evolving. And there's this savior martyr mentality that I think South Asian women, all women, and definitely South Asian women have have to deal with like all this emotional labor and constantly provide. And there was a lot of that I did for my partner. And I will say there's a lot of that I didn't need to do, that it wasn't my job. And I take accountability and responsibility for the fact that I pushed him in certain ways that he wasn't ready for. And he has a right to be on that timeline. He is a human being, just like we all have a right to be on our own timelines for our growth and our healing. And one of the biggest unlearnings I had was, okay, any partner I have, first of all, I'm not doing that emotional labor to change them. They can go see a therapist. They can start thinking about how patriarchy has impacted them. And I'm happy to talk to them about it, but I am not their therapist. I am not their mother. And I am not going to do that. And that has been one of the biggest unlearnings for me, especially in relationships with men, with cis men, that is not my job. I'm not going to do that because it completely took me away from meeting my own needs, or even knowing what my needs are, not even meeting them. What are my needs? What do I feel? I do a lot of workshops for organizations around like trauma-informed care and wellness, as well as coaching. And one of the trauma responses I mentioned is that we can have is not having needs because they've never been met. Like thinking you don't have needs because your needs have never been met. So it's like, oh, I don't need anything. It's like, yes, you do. You're a human being. So yeah, that was definitely the biggest unlearning for me.
I think that's a really important message for all of us, because I think so many people can relate to this in partnerships, even with their own children. You even talked about as a child, like the message of don't make a mistake. But as a child, that was your timeline. I love how you say that. Like you had to go through what you had to go through to get to where you are. And it's the same. And I like how you put it in terms of being with an addict. it's so easy to say, yeah, like go get therapy, you need to stop, you drink too much, you smoke too much, whatever. But they have to decide that themselves. And it's like this charge versus control. And we often as humans try to control an outcome that really isn't ours. And we're not, unless if we're, we have magic to do some kind of hocus pocus stuff. But aside from that, we can be in charge of how we choose to be around that. We don't have to be around it. We can make a choice in managing it. We can make a choice in, okay, today we're going to be going out and they're going to have drinks and I know they're going to do it no matter what. So what's the thing for me? How do I show up for me? And I think this gets lost for a lot of South Asian couples, especially the woman's side, because as we said earlier, there's loyalty over, your own boundaries and all these things. So as you said, the whole enmeshment. So we end up getting mad at that person. We end up getting mad at that problem. But it's like, what are we supposed to do? Like, if there's one thing for people listening right now that are kind of getting what we're saying and, they have an opportunity to do something different, what would you suggest is that thing that they could do?
So I think a big discernment that we need to have is the difference between caring for someone's feelings and caring about someone's feelings.
Ooh, okay.
So I talk a lot about like empathy versus emotional caretaking. I can care about people's emotions and be there for them and show that up and ask them how they're doing and give whatever I can. I can't make them my responsibility to change them. One, that's manipulative. Like his feelings, whatever those feelings are his feelings. And I don't have to like it, but I can make a decision about what's going to work for me. If he's angry and like yelling at me, I can make a choice that, or critiquing me or whatever, like what am I going to do to take care of myself? Because a lot of it also includes a lot of gaslighting too. And I think that's where things get tricky and we can start getting very like enmeshed and questioning trusting ourselves because we start gaslighting ourselves at the same time. So really, like, how much are you giving empathy to someone and when is that crossing the line into taking care of their feelings? And oftentimes, Kieran, taking care of someone's feelings, it's also to ease our own discomfort.
Ooh, isn't that the truth?
And
it's a distractions at the best. Like too, right? If I worry about you and I make you my priority all day long and what is Nisha going to eat? What's she going to do? Blah, 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 blah. Nisha this, Nisha that. Then I don't really have to do the things that I actually can be in charge of. Like, what am I going to eat? How am I going to handle whatever it is that I don't like that Nisha does? But instead, I'm going to focus on and I think that's such a common thing that happens in households. Kids see this between parents a lot. Kids and parents go through this a lot. So sorry to interrupt, but I was like, it definitely hit hard.
No, for sure. It's distraction and discomfort. And so we just avoid because it's just easier to look at other people, especially when they're in front of us, than look at ourselves. But everyone is a mirror for us too, right? When you said the distraction, it reminded me, it's the codependence, it's constantly attuning to other people and their needs. It reminds me of how, like to this day, whenever we take, like if it's me, I remember my brother's high school graduation photo, like the four of us, my dad, my brother, me and my mom. My mom is looking at my brother because his tassel was waving in front of him. So she was like, oh, it shouldn't be doing that, And there's a few other photos where it's like my mom is looking at us instead of looking at the camera. And it's just such a perfect, and I remember those moments too. And it's because she was like telling us that what we needed to do instead of being like, hey, I'm getting my picture taken too. And these are adults and they can take a photo. But that attunement and constantly being distracted and also not being able to be with that discomfort of things not being perfect has created this codependency where she doesn't even, and to this day, like has trouble. She's gotten better, especially as someone who's aging who needs to pay attention to her health. Yeah. But it's more like out of that like necessity, not 100%. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
So I'm glad about it because it's like, leave me alone. But but yeah, it's come out of that necessity.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens is you are in a relationship and you get this new job or something that requires, get a puppy, you have a baby, all these sorts of things that can take your attention away, and it is a necessity. You have to tend to these things in a different way. And I think the controlling piece, like that's a theme that keeps coming up for us in this conversation. And it's a common thing. I think a lot of people can relate to growing up in a household where both caregivers or one had that controlling tendency. I think people in current relationships can probably say, oh, that's me, or that's my partner. So how do you recognize that that's happening if either you're the one that's doing that extreme level of everything's got to be perfect, or it's happening, where that expectation is of you? Like, how do we look out for that? What's the thing to do about that? Because I think that's a deal breaker for so many people, and it impacts health on so many levels.
Yeah. I think as human beings, we all control in some way. Like, I don't think there's any of us that are immune from like wanting to control something, because what we're most afraid of is change and uncertainty. And that is life. Life is change and uncertainty. I think Octavia Butler has this quote that's like, God is change. Like, that is exactly what it is. I think that it's really important to focus on what it feels like in our body. Like, when I notice myself trying to, like, not liking something that my mom says or my brother says or my partner says, like, how does that feel in my body? And when did that happen before? Oh, when I was like 12, like, when did I feel that I needed to protect myself? And I think it's really helpful to reframe control as a protection mechanism. It's something that is protecting us at a time where we thought we needed to survive. We needed to belong. I always bring up this book, The Politics of Trauma, because I'm a big book person. I was a librarian in my past life, where it's called The Politics of Trauma by Stacey K. Haynes. And she talks about how our human needs are safety, dignity, and belonging. So those needs, ever since we were a child, we were trying to belong. We wanted to have dignity. We wanted to have safety. But then we started we were shamed by the world, by our parents, by a friend, by kids at school, by teachers. And what did we do to protect ourselves? We shut down. Did we fight? Like, those are the things that still show up in relationship, especially when someone triggers or says something to us that reminds us of a thing our mom said or a teacher said or whoever said. And knowing what that feels like in our body, and then the story that comes with it. A lot of what I do with my clients one-on-one, and also in my group program that's called Meet Yourself, because literally I'm like, I needed to meet myself. And that's one outcome that happens as a result of my program, is what are the things that we've done to be codependent, to constantly attune to others and get away from ourselves, so that we can know those things, so that we can turn toward ourselves, is really connecting to our body. My first week is called, is it my trauma response or my personality? So, because I've had like workshops about people pleasing and codependency, and someone's like, people pleasing is like just my personality. I was like, okay, well, let's back up a little bit. Has it been something that you've been conditioned to do, like because of your gender? Has it been something, or your culture? Has it helped you survive? And because it is like, the fawn response is a reflexive trauma response, where there's like a constriction in our body that's like, no, I don't want to do this. And then there's a performance that says, sure, that's fine. Or like, I don't have any problem with you criticizing me in front of everybody, whatever, that's fine. But there's a constriction in your body. And you get so used to that because, well, if I speak up, my mom might yell at me later for embarrassing her in front of everybody, right? Or if I say something, I'm going to hear it when I get home. So I'm not going to, I'm just going to act like it's fine. And it is a legitimate survival response that if someone, I always give the example, if your home is being robbed and someone is taking all your stuff, you're going to say, take everything take anything you want. It's not because you want them to, it's because you want to survive, right?
Yeah.
So that is like a fawn people-pleasing response, right? And that gets overcoupled and overgeneralized into other parts of our lives when we don't realize, like, one, maybe feeling the need to belong, like me feeling the need to belong to my ex-husband led to a lot of codependency and people pleasing. And then I had to realize, like, I don't belong to him. I don't, like, that isn't the belonging that I want anymore, So I think really paying attention to our bodies, paying attention to the stories. And, honestly, sometimes things just take their time for us to realize and have that awareness of. And, we have to really be honest with ourselves. And sometimes being honest with ourselves has its own timeline as well. So a lot of what I share with my clients is like, what does this feel like in your body? And what is that saying? What is the protection of your inner child who's feeling this? What is it trying to say? And how can we rewrite that story? How can we access safety to know that it's safe to rewrite that story in the first place so that we can build capacity to do it? Because sometimes we don't have that capacity. So it's a lot of steps, but I think awareness and
Yes.
connecting the body to the story and to our relationships is very important.
Maybe we can take a minute here and you can share a little bit about your current role, your job as a coach.
Yeah.
You're doing a really good job introducing some of the work you're doing with clients. And I'd love for you to drop your plug. Tell us where people can find you and what, if they were to sign up as a client, what could they, hope for with you?
Absolutely. So I'm on Instagram at Healing Hype Girl and TikTok at Healing Hype Girl. TikTok, I talk more about like brown girl problems. We're on Healing Hype Girl. I talk more about like my coaching services, and they're both very interconnected. But I'm talking also more about my memoir writing process and everything on TikTok. So follow me in both places. My website is nishaland.com, just like Disneyland. You want to go to Nishaland, obviously.
We'll have it in the show notes too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I provide one-on-one and group coaching. As I mentioned, I have my signature program that's called Meet Yourself. That's right now around 9 weeks, where we really dig into what is your trauma response? What's your personality? How are you being conditioned? I always bring systems in, as I think a lot of people by this point, if you've been listening, that really matters to me. How has patriarchy conditioned to what voice is really your inner critic? Because lots of times your inner critic, you think it's yourself, but it's become something that's been generalized. So for me, my inner critic is absolutely my mom's voice, and for my mom, she has voice too. Maybe for her, it was her mom. Maybe for her, it was culture. Sometimes it is just the voice of systems. So what people get out of Meet Yourself and my one-on-one coaching, but more on a deeper, specific level, is understanding that they don't have to constantly give in relationships and that they can receive, and knowing what they actually like and stepping into a next chapter. A lot of my clients, especially my longer term clients that are one-on-one, they're also moving toward maybe a project. Maybe they want to write something. Maybe they want to get more into their art. Maybe they want to leave a really terrible job, but they're too scared to because of the people pleasing, because of the overthinking, because of not knowing who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to really say, this is me, and have that more of that clarity, and having the tools and framework to return to that clarity. So I always talk about how I give my clients tools. And one thing that I'm going to share with you is I have a really great free resource called The 7 Tools to Cultivate Revolutionary Relationships in a Dystopian World. Because like I said, I always try to contextualize things like we are creating a relationship with ourselves and other people's in a world that is really challenging right now, where there's an increasing inequity, where there is more of a gap between the classes. And how can we cultivate these relationships with ourselves so that we're not constantly attuning to other people and everyone else's needs, so we can know what we like, so we can have better relationships with other people because we have a better relationship with ourselves and understanding what our needs are and what our feelings are. And how knowing our needs and feelings can lead to expressing ourselves and creating in a way that is not just for ourselves, but also supportive for the collective. I always think about our relationship with ourselves, other people, and the world. And then going back to that sense of responsibility. So it's really inner transformation that supports external transformation. So that's a lot of the work I do. And sometimes people come to me not knowing what that external transformation is even going to be, but they know that there's something out there. I would say people come into me at 2 starting points. One, they're just like desperate and they're like, oh my God, I have just been people pleasing my whole life. I don't even know who I am. I am just so sick of being bullied. And then the second is the one who has already started a lot of their own healing work, but they want to do some type of project. They want some consistency. They want support, practical support to help them keep them accountable for an art project or some type of, lots of time it's creative projects. Because ultimately, when we come back to ourselves, we realize we are a life force and life is here to create. So it's between those two points that people tend to come to me.
I love that, because when I hear you talk about what you do, I'm like, you're like another form of medication. not you per se, but what you're doing with your clients. We can go to the medical route and sometimes we need to, and I get all that and I'm not going to argue it, but there's sometimes it's the shortcut of not wanting to or not knowing how to reach within and do some of the work. And a lot of people in our community, because we're just learning how to be a thriving community, a lot of people have endured a lot of abuse and a lot of sad stories of sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, all the abuses. And I think, we come from a history of abuse when we look at colonization, and all of that has kind of gone into this messy ball of intergenerational stuff. So what my mom was going through when she was having me, what her mom was going, and then what I'm going through while I'm having my kids, we're carrying all this. There's lots of science about epigenetics and all that out there. And I think we just are so confused as a community because we've only known what we've known. And I think a lot of the community at times thinks that, well, because I've survived this far, then, that's good enough. And I like what you're doing because you're encouraging us to look at, quality of life versus quantity of life, and kind of circling back to where we started with little Nisha, that expression piece, it gets taken from us at such a young age. And we've all had dreams. We're all creative. And I think as a community, we know we're really thriving when arts and culture are at the brunt of it. And I really, really like what you are doing with the clients and what you're encouraging us to, from an internalized place and then bringing it to the outside place, because I think a lot of us start on the outside, the external stuff. And so I think this is like really helpful. And so if anyone out there wants to get in touch, Nisha mentioned how to go ahead and do that. And I just wanted to ask you a few more questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
About some of the stuff. So we've talked a little bit about leaving, divorcing, choosing yourself. And I think a lot of the work you're doing with clients parallels that big picture of choosing yourself. How do you do that? How do you prioritize yourself? And it doesn't mean you're not choosing others. I think sometimes we think it's one or the other. And maybe you can speak to a little bit about that. Choosing yourself is not selfish. But how would you tell someone that that's not selfish and that's actually a healthy thing?
Yeah. I often like to use nature as metaphor. So thinking about a flower and a bee. A bee is going to a flower to get pollen, right? So a bee is doing its thing and a flower is being its most floweriest flower. It is not selfish. It's just being itself. And I think the word selfish gets just like a bad rep. I think that it's okay for me to focus on my self-expression, my truth, so that I can be the life force that I'm supposed to be. And I think that's also an example for other people to do the same, instead of me trying to be who I'm not, me trying to say, oh, that I need to be like that person. I need to change who I am. And that's literally like a flower, like a tulip trying to be like a hydrangea. It's like, no, you're supposed to be a tulip, be a tulip. And I like to think of us in the same way. And I also think us being in our highest expression is also being in accordance with the earth and what the earth is asking us to do. I have a client who gave me this really great metaphor about like a crystal as all these different facets. And it turns out we're all like part of one thing, but we have these different facets. And, it's okay that we nourish all of them instead of trying to be something else. So that's what I say to people who like fear that they're going to be selfish. And I think, like I said earlier, remembering that we're interdependent, remembering that we're connected to other people, remembering that maybe we do owe each other something, maybe we should think about how we're consuming food and how we're eating food, in the capacity we can. I understand things are expensive, and I understand people might have to go to Walmart and buy on Amazon because they don't have access in other ways. So thinking about our responsibilities also contextual and also for our survival. And I think that that's important. But I do think that we have a responsibility to each other, to the world. But our responsibility has to start with knowing what is mine to do. I'm not here. I cannot do everything. There are so many causes that matter. So what is my role? I'm someone who's very relational. I like to write. So I'm going to do those things and express myself in service to everyone around me, coming from my unique point of view in my experience. And that to me is like when I shine, I always have like a very big Care Bear vibe. I talk about Care Bears a lot in my work. It's like the Care Bears, there's like Grumpy Bear and there's Funshine Bear and there's Cheer Bear. And the way they have power is that they hold each other's hands and they give their Care Bear stare. We're all here to do our own thing and to be our own cheer. Grumpy Bear is a grumpy for a reason. And there is magic in that too, right? So how can we then come together and shine on everybody?
What is it like for a woman who has never been taught as a child in her
Yeah.
upbringing and even where she's at in her lifespan to ask herself, okay, what do I want? What is that? I'm sure you come across clients that are like, I don't know. If you ask me, what do I want? I don't know. It's like going to, as we talk about mass production, going to a Walmart, wherever, and looking at the shelf and
Yeah, yeah.
seeing tens of thousands of shampoo bottles. And you're like, I don't know which one is best for me because there's so much choice now out there. And I've never, been guided along. So I'm just curious for the
Yeah.
clients you get and from your own experience, or anyone else listening that maybe needs a little bit of inspiration about what goes down for us when we don't get to answer the question of, what do I want for myself? How do we change that script, encourage women to ask themselves that more?
Oftentimes when people don't know who they are, they don't know what they like, it's like they're starting from being a little kid again in an adult body. So I think it's really attuning at that point what your feelings are. And I do an exercise. One of my tools is like feelings and needs exercise. I actually have these cards that I give to my long-term clients. I have right here feelings. Here's the needs cards. And then here's the feelings cards. So I have these feelings and needs cards that I give to my 6-month clients. So we look at your feelings, validate them as they are. Don't say, I shouldn't feel this way.
Mm,
The second we say, I shouldn't feel this way, we're not turning toward ourselves. We're turning towards someone's judgment of how we should feel.
definitely.
Like if you feel disgusted, let's be disgusted, So now that you're disgusted, what do you need? What need maps to that feeling? And I really meet people and accept them for where they're at, not judge
Yeah.
them, coming from a place of curiosity, not judgment.
Yeah.
And so you're starting where you're where you are, and we're going from there, and we're building a story for yourself. And I think it's actually so magical to see where people go. And when they start to accept their feelings and their needs and not see them as problems, and also at the same time taking accountability. So of like, okay, when am I projecting my feelings on someone else because I don't know what to do with them? I don't know how
Mm,
to meet my own needs. And so that's, I think, a huge place to start, as well as connecting to our body and connecting to that young child where you might be stuck at that age to a degree and what they needed. And a lot of times it's acceptance, it's to be seen, it's to be heard. And my job as a coach is to meet you at that place and not expect you to be at the place where you're starting the podcast you've always wanted to, because you don't even know who you are. You don't even
yeah.
know what that podcast is. Or maybe we're starting the podcast and you change your mind about what it is 6 months later because you've learned something new about yourself. Like I said, we're always becoming, we're always evolving, but it really is building the foundation of who you are through meeting yourself where you're at. And
Yeah.
it could be really scary. It could be feeling less than other people. And I always say, and I kind of look at it through this karmic perspective too, like I'm not supposed to be on someone else's timeline. You know, whether you believe in reincarnation or not, like that's where they're at, and they're here to be for the lessons that they're here to be for, and I'm here to be here for the lessons and relationships that I'm here to be for. And that might mean that I fail a lot. That might mean that that person looks like they're succeeding a lot, and that's okay. If I really come to a point where I am meeting myself, where I am accepting myself, where I am laughing and being curious about myself instead of judging myself, I really am allowing myself to be in my fullest expression without keeping myself small and shrinking myself as I have my whole life.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of safety in that when we start learning how to show up for ourselves. And I think sometimes that's that's the biggest challenge is when you in our community aren't taught these skills, these ways to figure out who am I, what do I need, even self-worth. Like that's what my husband and I say. I don't care what my kid's career path is. They could have the biggest and most well-paid job. They could be getting paid just to get by, and none of it matters if they don't have self-worth. And I think self-worth is something our generation is starting to only learn about now, because the ones before didn't even know what that meant. You just autopilot, you do what you got to do, and right. And so when we're sitting in a room and we're talking with a bunch of people, you see that, you feel that, because people are kind of looking at each other around, okay, what am I supposed to do? And I like what you said about, it's not just even identifying the feeling, but it's like, how do I feel about that feeling? And I think that's why a lot of people stop themselves. I'm feeling jealous, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling, let down, but how do I actually feel about that? And I think that's the key, is like it's like Inception, the movie, the dream within the dream within the dream, right? The feeling within the feeling. Like, you can really get into that. You had mentioned a few minutes earlier, though, a little bit about it can be a lot in figuring out how to be there, not on a personal level, but globally for the world and each other. And is it consuming less? Is it doing our best to not shop at the big capitalistic places? What are the things to do? And when you and I had our consult, something that really stayed with me was when you did talk about how to have impact. That's really shifted for a lot of people after October 7th. It's really hard for people.
Yeah.
And I felt that, because I think, again, not personally, but even just globally, after the attacks on Gaza, after October 7th, even for myself, what I thought I knew, I didn't know. And the people that I hung around with, I started to look at that even. I started to look at myself around those people, the realities, and am I doing what I need to do with raising my kids? All these sorts of things start to come up. And I think the world continues to feel heavy, overwhelming, and it's hard to know how to create kind of impact and do the best you can when everything seems so broken and divided. And so, when you say impact is harder after October 7th, can you talk a little bit about that, what you mean? And I think there's a lot of people out there that are going to connect to this, because I think we need to start talking more about this so that we can show up better. I think we're stopping ourselves because we're all worried that we're going to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. And I'd love to hear from you what you think about all that.
Yeah, absolutely. That was after October 7th was really hard for me for a while, because I felt like, what is the point of my work? What am I even doing? Look what's happening in the world. Also, but I'm not doing enough. Like, should I be on the streets? Should I be donating more money? Should I not even do this work and become a community organizer? Like, there's a lot of this like shoulding of myself.
Yeah.
And I think when there's also a lot of shame, even in leftist spaces online, for people doing things wrong, right? And there's cancel culture that's out there. And I think what's important are two things. It's like, what is mine to do? What is within my capacity and in my skill set? And one of the tools that I have in my 7 tools resource is skill. Like, what creates relationships, saying like, this is something I'm good at. This is how I can support you and support myself and support the world. And how can I use that now? If I'm good at writing, or if I'm good at understanding how to put a stage together, like, I don't even know. Like, there's so many things we can do that can support the collective, and we don't have to do everything. So it's really understanding that, is there a voice of shame coming in? Where is it coming from? And there's definitely suggestions and I think support online, but the internet is transactional ultimately. And I think that it's really important to be relational and talk to people about your struggles, talk to people who you feel safe with, and also cultivate your safety. I think you had mentioned something about that before. Like, when I was talking about like how I work with people, it's like I also build their capacity to feel safer, so that can do more and can hold more, but not hold everything. We are here to do things together too. And to know that you alone, no one as us as individuals are going to save the world. Like, that's just like not how it's going to work. And I think there's a lot of beauty in doing things locally. I think change isn't just going to happen on the internet. We had a time where the internet didn't exist, everyone, right? So like, people were still making changes, but that is facilitating a lot of shame. But it's also facilitating a lot of suggestions and hope and opportunity. Ultimately, the internet is a tool in a world where we have these dominant systems that create a whole fuckery of layered relationships and shame. So yeah, that would be my suggestion, is to really think about what is yours to do. Think about how much you might be shaming yourself, and know that it's enough. It really is enough to do something. And it's also a good idea to stretch yourself a little bit. I always talk about with my clients how there's two types of discomfort. One, the type is harming us. Maybe you're stretched thin, you're, constantly giving, you're not sleeping. And then there's a discomfort that asks us to grow. Maybe I'm scared to speak up and share something online, but maybe that's my stretching. That's where I need to stretch. Maybe someone says something that's misinformed, and maybe I need to speak up when they say that. The discomfort for me to not say anything because I'm not going to be liked, maybe that's a stretching goal for me.
Yeah.
So I think that it's really important to discern which type of discomfort is happening. A month or so after October 7th, I was constantly scrolling on social media. There was so much like these bodies and everything. And I started experiencing vertigo for the first time in my life. And I was like, it is not helpful for me to constantly look at this stuff, because how am I going to help anybody if I can't even sit up and see things straight?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like literally spinning. I remember I went to Pilates and I was like getting up and down so slowly because I had this vertigo and I had to stop looking at things. And there's a balance between being aware and sharing things and just not even being able to do anything.
Yeah.
So what is going to facilitate me to have, I don't want to say maximum output from a productivity lens, but an impact that matters to me, that is aligned with my skills and my capacity and my values too. There's a lot to be said for public protests being kind of performative.
Mm-hmm.
Your thing is to, like, you don't want, like, showing up for you doesn't have to be sharing things on social media. It can be mutual aid. It could be cooking someone a meal and listening to their stories about, like, centering a Palestinian voice and saying, like, what is your story? Tell me something. It could be reading books written by Palestinians. Like, there's a lot of things that you can do. So where do you want to start, and how can you grow from there? And then how can you also connect with others from there?
Yeah, I think all that is well said. And I think sometimes even for me, and I know this started for me with October 7th, I was afraid to talk about it on the podcast, and I was advised many times, you got to stay neutral, and and then I think for me, taking action was doing a lot of like internal unlearning as well, of like, okay, what am I afraid of? What have I been conditioned as a Punjabi girl all my life? And the homes that I grew up with, of families about immigrants and people of color, and then I also grew up in the system of white supremacy. And so of course there's discomfort. So everything is connected. And I think that was probably the biggest learning curve for me, was these patterns are showing up in our own homes and then outside of our homes on the macro level. And so I started to, as you said, get a little more curious, which honestly helped me become more brave to get to where I am today, to just have open conversations. And that did mean losing a lot of people in my life. It also meant, not tuning into certain channels and stuff. And I think you're absolutely right, of some people's voice is in the protest world and some people's voice is, having conversations in their own home or whatever. But I think sometimes when we don't know what to do, I know for me, it was like, okay, I got to start with myself. I got to start with me, and I got to start with my kids. And then we'll figure out from there. Yeah. And now we're at this place where we're like talking about AI. We're talking about, like you said, consumerism, all these sorts of things that I didn't necessarily know were so deeply embedded and connected. And I think the more we talk about these things together and we feel comfortable and safe, I think the more we learn as well about, okay, this is your perspective, that's interesting and whatnot. And so I honestly wanted to bring this part up because I think we need to keep talking about it. I think over time, for a lot of us, we go into the comfort of our everyday life, and it is important to know that this is still going on, and you guys in the US are experiencing your own versions of division at an all-time high as well. And I think there's lots of connection there. So I'm sure I don't need to tell you that, you guys are living it yourself, but we all feel that impact all the way over here in Canada too. Like, we feel it because we're all connected to each other.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate your encouragement of like, we can all do something. We all have skills. We all have talents. We all, whether it's quiet, whether it's loud, whether it's through expression, whatever it is, it's possible. So appreciate that. Okay. So we're wrapping up. and I can keep talking to you. I'm wondering if you want to wrap up and I have you come back and we do like another conversation about the patriarchy, misogyny, the men part, dating the brown girl, white guy thing, because I think this will take up more time and I really want to have this conversation and I want to have it with you. So I think I'd like to pause that part and then maybe just like do the last bit about cycle breaking, which is a huge part of your work. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I just want to, on your, if we follow you on Instagram, we will see this on your page. When you talk about your mission, your life's work, you talk about women should not tolerate abuse. You talk about being in the era of cycle breaking, which is what you say is your true calling. And I really liked what you said at the beginning too, which is it's not just about breaking cycles, but it's also creating some new rituals and routines as well. And so can you speak to that a little bit and give us some advice, some tips about that before I finally let you go?
I think for the cycle breaking and cycle making, it's one thing I always start with my clients with is, what are your values? What matters to you? And then we actually make values-based goals because, coaching is a little more goal-oriented than like therapy. So it's like we make goals, but they're more intrinsically motivating when it's about values.
Can I ask you something here though about the values? Like,
yeah.
How many times do your clients so quickly answer that what their values are? How many times is there a huge pause and like lack of clarity?
So I actually have a values workbook that I give them and I ask them to do it before we meet. And I say, if you can get to your values, great. If you're like, I have 30 of these, I don't know. If you are really confused, that's okay, because I'm going to meet you where you're at and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. Sometimes people have trouble narrowing it down. So we talk about it together. We narrow it down. Sometimes we just like end up with more because like that's just where they're at. And then we make values-based goals from those values. But we usually end up somewhere where they feel pretty good. And I also say, choose a stretch value. Maybe integrity is something that's feeling hard for you, but that's kind of where you want to go toward.
Yeah.
You want that to be. So because I start there, it makes everything very grounded in what's important to you. Then you kind of understand for the cycle making, why do you want to do this? What is my responsibility and what are my goals? What cycles am I creating? Is the cycle I'm creating that I'm going to discover and share my creative modes more publicly? Is my cycle breaking that I'm going to really work on the relationship that I have with this sibling that comes from a place of care and connection instead of my fight response? Like what is that new cycle that you're creating that is going to ripple out for everyone to witness and for yourself, but starting with you and starting from a place that matters to you. And then always connecting that to larger systems. Like how is this cycle breaking something that's disrupting patriarchy? How is this something that's redefining what success means in our community? So I always start with the values piece because it is a really beautiful, I talk about values being an anchor and a compass, right?
Yeah.
It grounds you and then it shows you what direction you want to go. And, I've had one really cool thing that happened with one of my clients was that halfway through, we shifted one of the values because she had grown to understand herself differently. And therefore that value shifted.
100%. Yeah. I love that.
Really cool. I was like,
yeah,
oh, really great. It shows that you've grown. Not that your values have to change.
Totally.
But it really showed that shift in how she was understanding it.
Yeah.
So that was really, really cool.
I can totally see that and appreciate that because even in personal experience, and I'm sure people that are with us today would agree too, that sometimes what serves us at a certain part of our life doesn't necessarily mean it's going to serve us at a different part. Like we are evolving through the lifespan. And I think as a South Asian community, there's that loyalty again. We've been taught this is the way it is. And then we don't question, okay, but who said? Who said this weird thing over here that we've all been following? But it hasn't really been helping us grow, be better, do the things that we want to do. And this is a great workbook to have or an exercise to do about, okay, what are my values? Because it even goes back to the conversation we had a few minutes ago about impact. Like we can't do the social justice work if we don't know where we stand and what we stand for. And I think some of us are wavering. We're not sure. And if you're a people pleaser, then you're also naturally standing for what everyone else around you is standing for too, because yeah, you're great, you're great, you're great. So it all connects. And okay, like deeply, what grounds me? Where do I come from? What are the things that if no one's there for me, I can hold on to these things and I stand by them. Honesty, whatever else that, caring for humans, whatever it may be that we're not always taught, which is so weird. We're taught how to survive. And I think it's cool to be able to go back and have those kind of conversations of what do I value? And I'm sure that impacts people's relationships too. And so that's cool that she was able to get to that place. I love that.
Yeah, it was really neat.
So if women, people are listening right now, and maybe the one on autopilot, the one who's forgotten herself or themselves, the one who thinks it's too late, this is the way it is, or I don't believe in this, I'm fine. What would you say to that human being right now?
Yeah, I would say it's never too late. I think a lot about, as a writer, authors who publish their first book when they're 70. Like it's never too late to turn towards yourself. Some people never do it. And so what is one small thing that you could do today? Maybe that's taking a nap for 30 minutes. Maybe that's going on a walk. Maybe that's calling a friend and saying, I need help. Maybe it's getting that book that you've been wanting to get that will be supportive for you, or joining going to Al-Anon, whatever it is, like what is one small thing you could do so it's not so overwhelming where you feel like I can't get that far, right? And this once again goes back to like meeting yourself where you're at, because large change is just a collection of a lot of small steps, and it's not linear up, it's up and down. Like I said, I was just with my mom for 5 days. Trust me, I slipped, a few times with her. Love her, but like it was activating, and I did not have a chance to leave before I left to ground myself, which is often what I do before I see my mom. Journal, like things like that. And I didn't have a chance to. So I also gave myself grace, but I also returned to some of the tools I have, and I didn't do it perfectly, but I did my best. Yeah. And so just reminding yourself that you don't have to do it perfectly, that there's always a starting point, and it's not too late. You don't have to be on autopilot. Like every single thing I think we do from an energetic perspectives impacts other people around us. And people, when I've seen like on the internet, like on threads, a lot of people are like, what's the moment you knew you wanted a divorce? And for me, it was a collection, but the real time where I was like, I told him he had to leave was because I started severely dissociating, and I experienced what's called derealization, where I kind of went to it's going to sound weird, but it happens where I almost like went to another place. Like reality wasn't reality anymore. And I started really dissociating. And that didn't just happen. That happened over an accumulation of a lot of pricks and scrapes and all these things. And in the same way, you can build in that way. It's not just one direction. There's a lot of small things that I've done. And there's a lot of stuff I used to do a lot that I don't anymore. I used to meditate a lot. I don't anymore. I used to journal in a specific way. Now I do it differently. And that's an evolution. It doesn't have to be the same thing over and over. I talk about consistency can be inconsistent. It's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned you're working on a memoir. I feel like you need to name it Meet Yourself Where You're At, because that has been such an important theme for today. Yeah. But before you go, tell us about projects that are coming up. So I know you have published writing. That is your expression. You talk a lot of your experience through that. So tell us a little bit about where we can find some of your work and when we can expect your memoir.
Sure. So I'm hoping maybe by the time this comes out, I'll be writing more in my Substack. It's called Memoirs of a Nisha, and can play on the Memoirs of a Geisha a little bit. And I was using it before to like review memoirs, but I think I'm going to actually do deeper dives with memoirs and nonfiction books. And I'm talking about like for memoir lovers and personal growth nerds who want to play. So something getting deeper in terms of like annotating books, getting into it and connecting it to our personal growth, which is also our collective growth. So that's one place. I also, in the beginning of the year, will start sharing more about one-on-one coaching that you could do with me to help you grow to that next level that you want to go to. Whether that is like, I am sick and tired of being sick and tired, or it's like, I want to do this creative project and I keep self-sabotaging. I keep getting in my own way. I need that support, and support that is not just about like having a project management dashboard and timelines, but also what are the voices and the stories that you have in your head that are keeping you small, that come from patriarchy and these cultural stories. So I'll be doing that, and probably mid-year next year, I'm not exactly sure when, I'll be doing my Meet Yourself group again. So definitely get on my email list, because that's the best way to hear the updates for what I'll be doing. And I'm about 50,000 words in with my memoir, first draft. So I'll be hopefully finishing that in the next few months, and then I will start on the second draft and do that. So a lot of what I'll be talking about on my different social media channels.
Is there anything you wish that we talked about today, or I asked you, or you want to go back and clarify that maybe we didn't get a chance to?
No, I think we really hit on so much together, and yeah, I'm really grateful for this space.
I am too. I do agree that we did hit a lot. And now I know that you'll come back to do a part 2. So to the women listening, the people listening right now, what's one last thing you'd like to leave people with? If they leave with one thing and only one thing in today's episode, what do they hope that is?
You do not have to do what you think you quote unquote should do. And I think that really goes with not just what are your feelings, but how do you feel towards your feelings? And if your feeling towards your feelings is anger, resentment, frustration, shame, embarrassment, then that is something to dig into, because that is coming from some type of should that you've been conditioned to have.
Well said. Well said. I didn't ask you what you wanted to put your middle fingers up to.
I'm putting my middle fingers up to the shoulds. Feeling like we should be a certain way instead of just being ourselves.
Thank you so much for your time today, Nisha. I really appreciate chatting with you online. I appreciate, you hype me up too all the time. Whenever I have something that I share, you send so many kind messages. So you're clearly, genuinely living what your name is. I really hope people reach out to you. Does it matter if they live in other parts of the world? Can they still work with you?
Oh, yeah. I've had a client in Africa. I've had clients from all types of places. So please do reach out.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much.